So this presentation is about detecting the warning signs of failure before the event occurs. So before every major accident, there are warning signs that there is a failure coming. And by being able to detect these warning signs, we can prevent that major accident occurring. And it doesn't matter whether it's a process safety electrical event, whether it's gas, whatever it is. All of these things have warning signs. Major accidents in the past have told us this. So today we're going to look at how we might be able to prevent fatalities by seeing those warning signs and acting on them. And this is often called having a chronic unease mindset. And today we're going to look at specifically the role that our systems play in either helping us detect those warning signs or maybe hiding them. We all have systems in our business that allow us to be able to see when our controls are failing, and sometimes these systems don't act in the way we think they do, and other pressures within the business can suppress the warning signs. So we're going to look at that through the eyes of the Grosvenor Anglo mine explosion, and we're going to see how their warning signs were suppressed to the people that really needed them, the decision makers, to be able to prevent that major accident occurring. So what are warning signs? So warning signs are controls failing. They're when we've got weaknesses in our system, when we've got small events happening that could have been bigger. All of those things are warning signs. And being able to understand, especially from an electrical perspective, what all of those warning signs are, understanding how your controls are weak, is really your biggest opportunity to preventing a major accident. But the problem is they're bad news, and often our human nature is to suppress those things. So trying to bring those things to the surface in a company can be really uncomfortable, and we're going to see how that happened with Grosvenor. So being able to see and act on the warning signs is how we can prevent fatalities. It's one of the major strategies that high hazard organisations use. So I talked about this concept of chronic unease, and this really is in an individual mindset, but it's also an organisational mindset where we have a constant discomfort, not about the event actually happening, but about how we're managing the risks. A really healthy scepticism about, are the risks being managed and controlled in the way we believe they are? And if we can do that, if we can actually bring that discomfort to the surface and have those conversations, then we've got an ability to see those warning signs before they end up in a major accident. So on the 6th of May 2020 at the Grosvenor Mine, it was the site of a major methane explosion, and 5 men came deathly close to losing their lives. This is only a couple of years ago. And the explosion occurred only on their 4th longwall panel, which is longwall 104. We'll talk about that a bit more. So Grosvenor is owned by Anglo American. They're located in the Bowen Basin in Queensland. And by coal mining standards, or by mining standards in general, they're a big company, big systems. They've got expertise. How would they be able to miss all of these warning signs? But to understand that, we have to go back 4 years earlier to 2016 when they started developing the Grosvenor Mine. They were already experiencing a bunch of warning signs that their approach to managing their methane was not working. The warning signs were coming in the form of methane exceedances, high potential incidents, things that you report through to the regulator. So let's go back and just understand what a methane gas exceedance is, just so we're all on the same page. In underground coal mining, methane is released from the coal. So you're cutting it and it's being released at the rate of your producing. It's also coming in from seams above and below. So it's continuously changing. It's not an easy thing to manage, but every time you exceed a certain level, so in Queensland, that's actually 2.5% of the total concentration of gas. in the atmosphere, underground, in the working atmosphere, you have a chance of an explosion. So most people who know something about methane will be thinking about 5%. At 5% it's explosive. There's a heap of modelling, a lot of modelling. There are a lot of major accidents that show that at 2.5% on one of your detectors, you can have layering, you can have pockets. We don't have, air that's perfect in a mine and flowing through at certain levels. There is an opportunity for an explosion, and that's why the regulator sets it at 2.5%. In New South, I think it's 2%. So it's not that big of a safety factor when you know you're having events at that. It's actually a very real potential of an explosion. So this is my little symbol for methane gas exceedances. You'll see that all the way through my presentation. And that's that every time one of those little bubbles comes out, at that mine, there has been a potential for an explosion. It just hasn't matched up with an ignition source. And as I said, at that level, you would have to report that through to the regulator, investigate it, understand why it's happening, and take some action. But every single one of these methane exceedances is a warning sign. It's proof that the controls that Anglo thought they had in place weren't actually working. And so let's go back to 2016, Longwall 101. So there were 4 longwall panels between the time they started and the explosion. Before the coal even hit the surface, they were starting to have exceedances, often well into the 5% range. By September that year, they had had a number of gas exceedances. Some of those were reported through to the regulator, some weren't. The regulator was starting to take notice, but they were looking at these events just as the site was individually and understanding what the immediate causes were, ventilation issues, something wasn't set up, there was a mistake in how the process, they cut too fast. Every single one of those things, they were looking at them individually. And this is a real issue with not being able to see the patterns, is to stand back and have a look at all of the warning signs together. So when they got to Longwall 102, which commenced in December 2016, the site was plagued with methane issues. The inspectorate was visiting regularly, but there were different inspectors coming every time. And they didn't really have a system to combine their information and really see those patterns of each of the high potential incidents. The site was looking at them still individually as well. They were doing analysis to understand, and it was becoming really clear that the pre-drainage had basically taken away the safety margin, so they were operating very close to a gas exceedance almost every day. It didn't take much to end up with an exceedance. And in 3 months, they had 27 HPIs, high potential incidents. And to give you an idea of just how excessive that is, that's 60% of all of the high potential incidents for gas exceedances in Queensland mines for that period. Huge amount of warning signs. Imagine working at this mine, being underground when these gas exceedances are happening. So you would think, oh my gosh, everyone would stop and it would be a big issue, but every single time one of these happens, and this happens all the time with big events, electrical is exactly the same, because the bad outcome didn't actually happen every single time you have a high potential incident, the people at the front line begin to think that the controls are working, and they start to normalise it and believe that the high potential incident could never end up in an explosion. And so often we use our high potential incidents, because they're not resulting in bad outcomes, as proof that things are working and that we're okay to continue. And this is called normalisation of deviance. It came out of the Challenger explosion. So also about this time, Longwall 104 had kicked off, and it was just in development stage, and there'd already been 4 exceedances just during development. By the time Longwall 103 came about, that was in July 2019, in 5 months they'd had 13 exceedances. They were running so close to the edge with such little redundancy, it just didn't take much. There were lots of immediate causes, as I said before, that were different. Ventilation, drainage, holes not working, but the underlying issue was the same, which was the infrastructure that was to manage the gas, to take the gas out of the mine, could not do it at a rate that they were producing. And this is pretty much what every single one of their investigations said. So it's not like it wasn't known. And we'll talk about why that wasn't escalated later. The other thing that was happening is that every single time one of these was reported through to the regulator, and I can say I see this in many, many companies, is we're so good at writing actions that do nothing to actually manage the risk. We review stuff. We're going to look further into issues. We're going to develop a plan. And those things actually do nothing to manage the hazard now or systematically improve the management of the hazard. And I can see people smiling in the room. I'm sure we've all written an investigation report to the regulator that has something like that. So once we got to Longwall 104, it was deeper and longer. The gas pressure was more. Things were not getting easier. They were mining through a fault, so there was cavities as well that they were trying to fill. There was gas coming in from basically everywhere. The workers report that methane was bubbling up through the surface, through the water as they were walking through. It was becoming very, very close to the edge and I suppose well known to the people that there were gas issues. By the time production commenced on the 9th of March, they'd had their first HPI just 9 days later. The next one was the following morning. 2 days later, another HPI. Another within 24 hours. The 6th of April, another. The 7th, another. The 21st of April, they had 6 gas exceedances in 1 day. They actually only reported 4. 2 of those got lost in the system, just in the amount of paperwork that was being generated from these things. And these were all on days when production was well above target. Things seemed to be going well. And this is the climax of the story. That's my notes. So the warning signs were coming thick and fast to the team on the ground. All that happened within 20 days. Until the 6th of May 2020, it's early afternoon and Wayne Sellers, the shearer operator, is underground with 4 others at Longwall 104. It's almost lunchtime and the operators are changing over. I think we've got a mismatch on the slides. And the operators are changing over at the face. Suddenly, without warning, an intense pressure wave blasts through the area like a cyclone. Wayne braces himself and it almost knocks him to the ground. As quick as it's come, it's gone. The power's tripped and it's dark and quiet and still, and the ventilation stopped running. Wayne collects himself and he turns to his workmate. They're not going to like this, it's another HPI. But before he gets a response, a second pressure wave hits them. It's a cracking noise with a blue flame sweeping over them. It's hot, and Wayne tucks himself up into a ball. Then silence, it's past. Wayne holds his breath and he feels for his self-rescuer, but he can't locate it. He takes a small test breath, wondering if he's going to be able to breathe, and relief, the air seems okay. He hears screaming and he begins to head towards the exit. Adam, his deputy, comes out of the dust towards him. "Wayne, you're on fire." He hasn't even realised. He just wants to get to the surface. Notes aren't working, I'll have to go to here. So 5 coal mine workers suffered horrific burns to their face and body that day. They were taken to Moranbah Hospital by road and airlifted to the Brisbane Burns unit. Wayne Sellers himself suffered blood clots to his lungs. He had 17 surgeries, skin grafts, and his ear was reconstructed. The others actually suffered worse, but Wayne was the only one that wanted to talk in the Board of Inquiry. They're all alive, but it doesn't get much closer than this. So what happened? Well, here's some footage from the tailgate post-explosion. That's LiDAR footage taken by the regulator afterwards. So 5 were injured, but there were 11 underground that day. And if it wasn't for their final mitigative control, which is a nice thick layer of stone dusting, that explosion would have propagated right throughout the mine and caused a lot more damage. Grosvenor Mine was actually closed for 20 months. Ignoring the warning signs has cost Anglo harm to their people, their reputation and their bottom line. So the reason we know so much about this event is the Minister called a coal mine board of inquiry in Queensland to this and a number of other high potential incidents that were happening at the time. Most of those ones that I showed you, but some at other mines as well. And that's why we've got so much information about it. Excuse me. There's a lot of learnings to be offered up in these 2 volumes of reports that have both been released, and as you can imagine, I'm only choosing a very small part to talk about today. So in terms of a technical cause, the report talks about an explosive mixture of methane and air close to the shields on the tailgate side of the GOF, where SPONCOM activity was occurring. So there were 2 pressure waves. The first was SPONCOM initiated methane explosion, and the second one was polyurethane resin, which they were actually using to help with the cavities, which had an exothermic reaction and heated up. They were the findings by the Board of Inquiry into the investigation. What was happening to all those warning signs beforehand? Anglo actually had systems to capture the warning signs. They were reporting, they were investigating, they were talking to the regulator about it, analysing their data. But the way they were using their risk management system, the system that was there to detect their warning signs, was actually suppressing those warning signs. So let's take a look. Trouble starts back with Anglo's recognition, and can I say many companies' recognition of methane high potential incidents below 5% as a situation that can cause an explosion and loss of life. The 2 documents up here obviously are the report, but the other one is the best practice recommendations for methane management in coal mines. And the modelling in that shows there are many different situations at 2.5%, 2% where an explosion could happen. So based on that, you can have an explosion at 2.5%. A high potential incident is 2.5%. So what you would expect to see, if that was the case, is that on Anglo's risk consequence table, every single time they had a high potential incident, it should be reported through as a major in their system. And that might seem like paperwork, but we'll have a look at what happens when high potential incidents are underreported in a company's system. So this is the incident reports from a couple of the notification forms from Grosvenor Mine. And we can see from each of the incident reports that the assessment is much lower than major. So what this does is the significance of the warning signs are downplayed. From the perspective of the deputy filling this out, in most cases the gas is detected, the power's tripped to the face, there's a very real production delay that they're dealing with. They make changes to their ventilation and drainage, they fill out the paperwork, they send the bad news up the stairs and deal with that, and they get back online. And the thought process is that the controls are working, they didn't have the bad outcome. But we know with major hazards that is not the case, that very rarely these events turn into major accidents, and it's very difficult to predict which one's going to. So from a risk perspective, it looks like things are okay. And what we also see is when the deputies did mark it as high, somebody upstairs has actually crossed it out and down-rated the significance of the event. Why would a company do that? Hold that thought, we're going to get there. So this is another section of Grosvenor's incident notification form, and almost every gas exceedance HPI in that Longwall 103, 104 bears this handwritten inscription at the top of the page to distinguish such incidents as different from an Anglo high potential incident. Anglo were classing their gas exceedances not as high potential in their system but as compliance HPIs, things that they needed to report through the regulator, but they didn't see it as actually high potential within their system. And let's have a look at how that, and they actually wrote it into their definition, and I do see this in companies all the time where they believe that things that are being reported through as high potential incidents actually are just compliance or local legislative requirements. And you can see there that an Anglo HPI, so if you have something that doesn't have a big outcome but could, that's when it should be a HPI, so it's not like they don't understand the definition. Excuse if there's Anglo people in the room. I always get a bit worried about that. There probably is anyway. Anyone Anglo? Oh, thank God. Cool. No. So at a corporate level, these Department of Natural Resources and Mines, DNRM, compliance HPIs are treated as lesser incidents than Anglo HPIs, which means that you can see here from an investigation perspective, if you have a methane HPI and it's only a DNRM one, you don't have to tell anyone outside your site about it. Whereas if it's an Anglo HPI, you've got to have a group business unit person lead that investigation, an independent senior manager, an independent technical experts. So the controls that they'd put in place to try and raise these warning signs, by missing that detection that it is a high potential incident and not being able to see the potential, it meant that the site was trying to manage the major hazard risk rather than it being escalated to the company and getting the resources and the support that it's needed from a company perspective. The other thing here is you don't need to share your learnings with anyone else outside. So what this actually did was mean the messages coming out of these investigations were less important. It meant that gas wasn't as important as some of the other types of high potential incidents that were happening. And it also prevented escalation to the decision makers that should have been helping the site managers be able to understand, the fresh eyes to be able to see a different perspective and the risk associated with these things. And that flows into everything else that Anglo did to manage major hazards. It flowed into their strategy. It flowed into their analysis. So you can see here in terms of their fatal risks, mobile equipment features the highest. And you can see falling and dropped objects, uncontrolled release of energy. Methane gas is not on that at all. So in terms of a company perspective, we saw 60 plus high potential incidents on my little graph with all the bubbles, but not one of those made it into the company analysis of what is going wrong in terms of major hazards, whether that was a hazard or an incident being reported. And you can see that there are 63 mobile equipment hazards, and there are 7 high potential incidents for mobile equipment. There were much more gas. So gas would have featured highly on this, and it would have been on the radar of all the leaders that needed it, but it wasn't. In terms of their analysis, also, you can see here that their high potential incidents by quarter are going down. So underneath there, you can see that there's a statement on the, so this is the group analysis, and it says Grosvenor unfortunately suffered 2 HPIs, not gas ones, in December after running the rest of the year HPI free. So they're creating this kind of sense of comfort that things were going really well at Grosvenor, when actually underlying they were having a lot of gas management issues. Why would they do that? Well, they had a target of 0 HPIs as a company, and this is the power of putting metrics in place that drive reporting underground, and it is one of the biggest problems that I see in major hazard management. So first of all, there's a target of 0. The other thing that is happening, and these are all the safety metrics that are attached to the Anglo bonus structure for all leaders, nearly everything on there, except for high potential incidents and fatalities, is injury related. And what we know about major hazards and injuries is that there is no correlation or very little correlation in the causes. So if your company is focused heavily on managing its LTIs and the TRIF and its injuries, it is focusing on things that are not. If you fix all of those things, you are still not going to prevent major accidents and fatalities occurring. Those two things need to be managed very, very separately. And this is another common issue we see. And what it actually does is it puts the focus onto the injuries, and we don't manage control failures. And so this is the paradox, that the very systems that we put in place, our incident reporting systems, can actually work against us in preventing major accidents. They can hide the warning signs of the things that occur, our high potential incidents that don't have the bad actual outcome all the time. They can hide those things. And so as experts, electrical engineers, your role is to help the leaders in the company be able to understand those major hazards, the ones that are related to your risk, and the controls and what those controls look like when they're failing. And that is the biggest thing you can do to prevent major accidents and hazards in your company. And if you do that, you will create chronic unease because you are bringing those warning signs to the surface. There are companies that do this really well, airlines, air services, nuclear, and they have something all in common, ways that they are able to raise the warning signs. They build practices around those things, and there are 4 primary things that they do that you can put into your business as well. So the first thing is they have excellent systems that can detect the warning signs, very specific ones around the major hazards. Their incident reporting systems are not focused on injuries and slips and trips. They're focused on the major hazards and when their controls are failing. And those, it's not just incident reporting. You can use systems like your maintenance system and the critical equipment within your maintenance system that is related to your electrical hazards. You can use things like bridging registers, stuff like that, when critical equipment's not maintained, when you've got backlogs, all of those things. And they have not only good systems to detect, but they also create meaningful analysis around those and give it to the decision makers so they can have a chronic unease about things going wrong. They also build risk competence in their systems, so in their businesses. So this is a very clear picture from the board right through to the planners, the engineers, the front line on the major hazards and how they are controlled and what they look like when they're not working. So this is not some, gimmicky poster which has got your major hazards on it. It is detailed understanding of the controls and what they look like when they're failing. Bow ties are often used for this, but a lot of companies just put their bow ties in the drawers and don't use them to analyse when their controls are failing. But that is one of the biggest things you can do. They also, leaders in high reliability organisations have a questioning attitude. So the ego is left at the door when you go into the field, and you go to learn, you go to understand when the controls won't work, what the situation actually is, what people are dealing with on the ground, why there's a maintenance backlog, what are the challenges that people are having. And decisions are made by challenging assumptions. These seem like all good leadership practices, but these are the things that are common in all high reliability organisations. And the final one is psychological safety. So often this is seen as a bit of a buzzword, but if you have teams, especially engineering teams, who feel like it is okay to speak up and people listen to them, and they don't feel like it's going to be career limiting when they're continually saying this process is not working, this control is not in place, if your company accepts that and gives those people a voice, then and the same with frontline workers, you end up in a situation where you are learning continuously about what's going wrong. And they're the 4 ways that the best companies in the world detect the warning signs, and that's how they prevent major accidents. They actually turn that bad news, those warning signs, into good news. They see it as the things that they need to learn and improve. Thank you very much.